up, nerds? My name is Leslie Smith. Welcome to the Nerdy Narrative and one of my favorite videos of the year, Serial Killer September. I started this last year and want to continue it year after year because I love reading books about serial killers. Now, what does that say about me? I don't know. I'm sporting one of my favorite slasher serial killers, Michael Myers, from the movie franchise Halloween. That has been my favorite movie franchise for as long as I can remember. I know that I am not alone in that enjoyment, so I'm here to talk about the books that I read containing serial killers over the last year, the ones that I would recommend to you if you want to pick those up if you're like me and you love reading about serial killers, or if you're just looking for something spooky, scary to read during the month of October. One caveat to this video is I'm not going to talk about books that have a serial killer in it that you don't know that there's one in it. If it's not spelled out in the book description that it is about a serial killer, I'm not going to reveal that to you. I want to keep that a secret for those of you who might be already going to read those particular books organically. I don't want to be the one to spoil that for you. With that said, let's get into my very first recommendation for a serial killer book. This is my favorite serial killer. I love the Batore Butcher. It just has all of the things that make these type of books phenomenal. There's nothing slow moving about it at all. It's very fast paced and it switches between the point of view of the Batore Butcher and the people who live on the island of Boatmore. Prior to where this story begins, the only type of deaths that happen on Boatmore Island were accidental and old age. It's a very small, tight-knit community and impossible not to love these characters. I think that's one of the things that really makes this one stand out to me is the author took the time to introduce me to all of the people who live here. I love these people. These are people who would be my friends. So when the Batore Butcher ramps up and gets triggered and starts going on their killing spree, you as the reader are invested. You care about these people you're losing. And if I'm being quite honest, if you took out the Batore Butcher, the serial killer, and this was just a story about the people who lived on this island, it would still be a great book because I love those characters so much. This is one that will always be one of my top recommendations when people ask for a good crime thriller, serial killer story, horror story. The thrill, the suspense, the dread is just so creative and unique. A lot of serial killer slasher stories are what I would call formulaic. There's a formula to them that they follow and you expect that. There is so much unexpected things that happen here. You're just in a constant state of being off balance. I just absolutely loved it. At this point, I have to say these are in no particular order because I equally love these next three that I'm going to talk about, but for different reasons. Of course, the main reason is it features a serial killer. But let's go ahead and talk about All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. I read the prologue and the first chapter one night and then I put it down and I thought, uh-oh, did I really just finally find an S.A. Cosby book that I wasn't going to love? Well, no. The next day, I decided to incorporate the audiobook by Adam LeVar White as the narrator, and he is just phenomenal. And I ended up binging the rest of this book in its entirety. I couldn't think of anything but this book once I started it, and it was absolutely amazing. I'm going to tell you what happens in the first chapter because I think that's why I put it down and thought I wasn't going to like it. You meet Sheriff Titus Crown, who is the very first black sheriff in Sharon County, Virginia. He gets a call that there's an active shooter at the high school. He and his officers respond. The things that happen there, I thought, I don't think I'm going to be able to handle reading about a school shooting. Chapter 2, you find out it wasn't actually a school shooting. It was just where the person was that this other person wanted to shoot. It's also where it is revealed why this person walked in and shot this other person. It's a teacher who on his phone had some very questionable videos and photographs of children, and it's revealed that this little town has had a serial killer running rampant for decades. And Oh man, besides the whole case of trying to find out who this serial killer is, they know it's somebody that they know, they've grown up with. These people have been here for generations. Everybody knows everybody. And of course, S.A. Cosby also tackles the race divide in this town. To all of the white people who lived here, it didn't matter that they have known Titus since he was born. They've known his dad since he was born. It didn't matter that they knew him, knew the type of person he was. All that mattered was he was black once he got elected as sheriff. Cosby writes that Titus knew when he took the position what a hard place he was going to be in. He knew the white people weren't going to accept him because of his skin color. And they were just going to imagine he was going to always take the side of the black people. And he knew the black people were going to resent Titus because they would want him to do certain things for them because he was black. And he just really gets into the nitty-gritty of the line that Titus has to walk. And this character, Titus Crown, is the kind of man that we need more of in leadership. I said it in my review, I'm gonna say it again. It was a phenomenal book. It's one that if you're somebody who highlights, you're gonna highlight over half this book because my gosh, it was just absolutely amazing. Just all of the things that Cosby tackles in real life and how he does it. Oh, it's so good. It's just so full of direct truth and compassion. And then you got the whole freaking case of the serial killer. Phenomenal, phenomenal. This is one, if you're an audiobook lover, cannot recommend enough. Adam LeVar White is amazing. He is just absolutely astounding. He's the type of narrator that I would listen to a book just because he was the narrator for it. Staying in that same vein of amazing narrators, let's just go ahead and talk about the Bill Hodges trilogy by Stephen King. This is Mr. Mercedes, Finders Keepers, and End of Watch. This is narrated by the amazing Will Patton. He does such a great job. The main character is Bill Hodges, who, when we meet, has recently retired from the force, and Will Patton just really dials in on that gritty detective sounding voice. This trilogy is so good. I blazed through it in maybe a week and a half. It's so good that I remember where I was and what I was doing when I first read the series. Like, I drove by there the other day and I was like, that's where I was running when I started this book. That's just how much of an impact this series made on me. How this one starts is Bill Hodges is retired and he gets a letter from a serial killer of a case that he did not close before he retired, and it was just kind of hanging out there in the back of his mind, and the serial killer decides to taunt him. This serial killer, Mr. Mercedes, was someone who stole a Mercedes and plowed through a bunch of people who were waiting in line at a job fair. Injured a whole bunch of people and killed several. I want to say the number was 8. What I love that King did is the following 2 books in this trilogy began with that massacre, and it followed a different person's perspective and develop the story from there. But the serial killer, in Stephen King's fashion of liking to spoil his own books, he tells you who that person is. You, the reader, follow along as Brady Hartsfield is taunting Bill Hodges. The level of madness but also intelligence of this guy as he plans to do more and as Bill tries to stop him. I won't get any further into it than that because I definitely don't want to spoil the other 2 books in the series. I want you to read those. It's one of my favorite crime thriller trilogy. It's definitely my favorite crime books of Stephen King's, and he's just really kind of racking up some favorites for me because his fantasy series, The Dark Tower, is my favorite fantasy series of all time. I am definitely a classic King lover. His new stuff, not so much. I do want to talk about one that I don't have a physical copy of the book. It's one that I was lucky enough to be approved for the ARC. It's called Dead of Winter by Darcy Coates. It was my first book that I read by Darcy Coates. While it's not one that I'll ever reread, which is the only book I'm going to talk about in this video that I wouldn't reread. Everything else I own because I will reread many, many, many times. But this one I wouldn't reread, so I would say get this one from your library. This one takes place in a winter setting. duh, dead of winter. This small group is going up a mountain. They're gonna stay in this cabin resort that's generally closed that time of year for a couple of weeks just to unwind and unplug, and their bus breaks down. Right away, one of the members of the group disappears. They're looking for them, can't find them. They do find this little cabin that seems to be abandoned that they take refuge in from the elements. At that point, bodies start dropping. Now, I was not a fan of Darcy Coates writing all that much because the beginning of each chapter was kind of boring, slow pace, but then the end of the chapter was always on a cliffhanger. That actually may have been a smart decision by her because she definitely kept me turning the pages, and for the longest time I was like, man, this is so predictable, this is so predictable, even though I hadn't figured out who the killer was. She actually tricked me into thinking it was predictable because it really wasn't. There were some very interesting turn of events that happened that I was like, well, now wait a minute, now wait a minute, now wait a minute. So it did end up being a good book for me. I think I gave it 3 stars. But I did want to throw that one out there if you're looking maybe for a colder setting to read this time of year that featured a serial killer. All of the books that I'm going to talk about in this video today, the ones that I did utilize the audiobook or immersion read, this next one has the absolute best narrator of them all, January Lavoie. That narrator is a one-woman show. I was amazed at her talent in this one. This is The Diviners by Libba Bray. I really need to continue this series. It is the start of a 4-book series, I want to say. This one is set in New York. It's like 1925, 26, 27, just somewhere around in that time frame. Prohibition is in full swing. Where this one gets its start is there's a group of young people, I want to say they were college age. They were having a party, doing some drinking, and one of them pulls out a Ouija board, and this group, unbeknownst to them, awaken the spirit of serial killer Naughty John. And apparently whenever something supernatural like this happened in this world, it awakened this ability in others that were called the Diviners. This one was really creepy. I absolutely loved it. My final serial killer recommendation, you all knew this was going to make an appearance, and this is Stephen Graham Jones, one of my most favorite authors ever. My Heart is a Chainsaw, Don't Fear the Reaper. The 3rd book comes out early next year, and each of these actually features a different serial killer, and my goodness, you just cannot help but love the character of Jade Daniels. And I'm not going to talk about this one because it is the 2nd book in the series, so we're going to talk about My Heart is a Chainsaw, which I actually have a dedicated video review for, which I'll have linked up above for you, which now is a good time to say I'll have my website linked below where I have written reviews for all of these books if you want to read the book descriptions and my written reviews before making your decision if it's one you want to read. Another great audiobook narrator. Her name has just left me. She played on The Expanse. Kara G. She narrates this series and she is just perfect. What is so delightful about My Heart is a Chainsaw is it features the character Jade Daniels, a high school student who is friendless, looked down upon, but she loves slasher movies and she knows them backwards and forwards, and she spends this book just laying out what she calls Slasher 101, and she just knows that Proof Rock is on the brink of a serial killer making themselves known. Like, she sees a serial killer behind every door. She's doing her best to tell everyone who is not believing her. Even if you're not a fan of reading about serial killers, but you love a good slasher, which, I mean, really all slashers are serial killers if you think about it, because they never killed just one person. So if you've never thought of yourself as someone who likes to read about serial killers, but you love a great slasher story, here's a good anti-slasher story for you to pick up. And that's going to wrap it up for me for this one for this year. You know I'm going to be reading a lot of books next year, looking for more serial killer recommendations for next September. I hope I uncovered one here today that you haven't read before that is now on your radar for those of you who love these type of stories. If you've read any good ones this year that I didn't mention, definitely put those down in the comments below so I can get those on my to be read list. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you in the next one.